So why am I here? That's a very good question, I think. Why am I doing this? I remember one point in time somebody asked me the question of why would I rant about things that I hate, especially if other people can find enjoyment in them. And I feel like the answer is because I want to, and some people like it. So we're going to be talking about Cowboy Bebop today. Surprise of all surprises. And did I enjoy it? Not really. The general consensus I've been hearing, and what I am fairly confident is true, is that if you are an existing fan of Cowboy Bebop, the anime, you're probably not gonna like the new Netflix adaptation. The people who will like the new Netflix adaptation are the people that haven't watched the anime, that don't have anything to compare it to, and other people who may have watched the anime, but honestly don't care as much. Maybe that's not the right way of describing it. This could be some like weird personal fanboy thing in my head being like, the only way you're not as pissed off as I am is because you weren't a real fan of Bebop. And I don't want to say that that's the case though, because like I have met people who are pretty big fans of Bebop and they're like, it's okay. They're not shouting from the rooftops that it's an amazing adaptation, but they're like, it's all right. Maybe they're just jaded. And I feel like that's eventually where I'm going to get. I'm going to get to that point where it could have been a lot worse. And even now, I feel like I'm going to say things in this video where some people will be like, how are you not annoyed at that? And it'll be because, I expected it. I expected what they did to Faye. 100%. And because I expected it, I feel like I'm almost okay with a lot of it. Not all of it, but some of it. So how do we start with this? Well, I feel like the best place to start is to say, hey, if you're actually wanting to watch this new Netflix Bebop as a fan of the original anime, how do you do that? And there's a very easy way of doing that, I think, and that is watch it in Japanese. The vast majority of the Japanese cast is brought back, and they dub over the entire show, and almost if you close your eyes, well, granted, if you close your eyes, you can't read the subtitles, so maybe that's not the best piece of advice. But if you watch it that way, you can at least sort of feel like it's a lot more Bebop than what it actually is. Now, unfortunately, the only way that you can do that is if you have access to Japanese Netflix, because despite giving us access to like 5 different vocal languages in North America, Japanese is not one of them. But how do you access Japanese Netflix, you might say? Well, that's where we're gonna bring in today's sponsor. Because Glass Reflection would like to thank the sponsor for this video today, being the good people over at Surfshark VPN. A VPN is a way for you to help protect your privacy and what you view online as you surf and watch anime, along with, other videos on the web. Not only does it secure your data, encrypting it to help stop people from eavesdropping on your connection, but it also allows you to mask your location. Doing so allows you to bypass the region locking of a variety of streaming services, as not all streaming services are equal in what regions they service, or in this case, what languages they offer in those regions. So having a VPN like Surfshark can help you access shows in languages you might not be able to otherwise. Content blocked on services on Netflix and even on YouTube and others can be accessible simply by connecting to a local server from the country you'd like to access. And of course, Surfshark is available on a variety of devices as well as your PC, so you can stream your anime or your live-action adaptations of anime on the go, if you so choose. There will be a link and promo code in the description, so you can go and check out Surfshark and use that as you like. And best of all, if you try it out and you don't find that it helps, it's not doing what you expected, it doesn't actually work for you for one reason or another, Surfshark does offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. And thank you very much to Surfshark for sponsoring. So that's what you can do. Like, just use Surfshark, look up online how to actually connect and figure out a free trial to Japanese Netflix, connect it, watch the show that way. Because then it'll at least feel a lot more Bebop than whatever the heck this is. So, I spent a very long chunk of this past weekend, because I watched the majority of the show on Friday, and then I finished it up on Saturday. I'm now sitting here on Monday, and I'm recording this. I spent a good chunk of the weekend trying to coalesce my thoughts about the show as simply as possible. This is probably going to be a long ranty video anyway, because there are a lot of individual things I'm wanting to just get out there. But I wanted to see if I could make a summary of it, and I feel like it comes down to something I was saying about how I would hope that they do Bebop, and then almost feeling like I want to change it. So one of the things that I said prior to watching this Bebop series is that I didn't want them to use the anime as a storyboard, right? And I still sort of feel like that I wish that they didn't do that. Now, they don't do that, sort of. They don't use the anime as a storyboard, but not in the way that I wanted them to. So when I said that I didn't want them to use the anime as a storyboard, I really didn't want them to shot for shot recreate Cowboy Bebop. Because at that point, it begs the question of why are you doing that? Why are we watching your adaptation of Bebop if it's just a remake of this old one, like literally shot for shot? Why don't we just watch the old one and you save yourself some time? We all save ourselves some time and emotional turmoil. I didn't want them to do that. Now, they didn't do that, but they didn't do what I wanted them to do. So when I say don't make a shot-for-shot remake of Bebop, what I was hoping that they would do is that they would take the characters of Bebop and put them into new situations of their own design. They're like, hey, we think we have a rough idea of what this show's about, how the setting's like, and what these characters are, and what they would do in a variety of situations. Let us show you our story of how this works. Inevitably, it would all be fan fiction in some way, shape, or form, but that's why you say that you are consulting with Shinichiro Watanabe and that you hope that some of this is actually legitimate. You pass it off to him and be like, hey, is any of this right? And hopefully you are able to convince him to be invested enough to tell you where you screwed up. But that's not what they did. Instead, they didn't do a shot-for-shot remake. Instead, what they did was they took key points from a lot of major episodes of the show and then wrote around it. So let's just use episode 1 as an example. Episode 1 is a remake of the Red Eye episode, which is also episode 1 of the original Cowboy Bebop. In some cases, I wouldn't say it's shot for shot, but a lot of the beats are pretty identical. Once we actually get into the meat episode, because there is an intro bit, and we're going to talk about the intro, but I'm going to get to that. Once you actually get into the actual story of the episode, like, it pretty much follows what the anime did, but there are quote-unquote enough changes to make it original. It's like what happens when you're in school and a friend of yours is like, yeah, hey, here's my book report. Just put it into your own words so it's obvious you're not copying, but you can basically do what you want. So it's just regurgitating what happened in that episode in their own words, and they changed it slightly to be like, it's totally different, right? But you can really tell that they wanted to be as close as possible without being that close. One, they added in Faye. I don't know why they did this. When I was talking to a friend of mine about this, he explained that the reason why Faye is in episode 1 of live-action Cowboy Bebop is because North American audiences cannot take or understand having a main member of the cast not in episode 1. They don't understand how you can have a main character who's introduced like 3 or 4 episodes down the line, which is what happened in OG Bebop. Faye doesn't show up until like episodes 3? I think 3 is Honky Tonk Woman? Something like that. But they don't want to do that here, so Faye is here in the Red Eye episode, but she doesn't do anything. She shows up to say, hi, I'm Faye, and then she leaves for like 2 episodes, and it makes no sense. Briefly talking about LeFou for a moment. Like, there are so many problems with LeFou. God, that's what I feel like I want to touch on little bits of things, but it'll just snowball in other things. I want to talk a lot about LeFou. This is something that this Bebop does a lot. Anything that was subtle about the original anime doesn't exist. Subtlety is a brick here. They're as subtle as a brick in this show. Here's the thing. How does LeFou get beaten? Because in the anime, LeFou is this freak of nature, this immortal man that is very close to just outright killing Spike, but he has a weakness. You can't shoot him because bullets don't work. We don't know why they don't work, at least not in the anime. We don't know where he comes from. We don't know why he's after Spike. He's this weird phantom that we have to deal with because otherwise he's probably either going to kill people or just straight up kill Spike. In the anime, using knives to go through his energy shield is something that Spike kind of figures out on the fly, and it just sort of works, and he goes with it. It's one of those, Spike was probably going to die. We all thought that Spike was going to die. Spike probably thought he was going to die, and then he magically finds, oh hey, throwing knives works. I'm gonna do that. But in the Netflix anime, they can't have that moment for whatever reason. They can't have us thinking that Spike is going into this fight without a plan, despite that's 100% what Spike did in the anime. No. We have to say, we have to have this moment where Spike explains to Jet that, hey, we can throw knives and those will work against his force field, right? Why, though? All right. This is going to be a scattershot mess of me trying to figure out where I want to go and what I want to talk about. But let's start at the intro. So the intro of episode 1 of Netflix Bebop did what I wanted them to do, but not how I wanted them to do it. See, for many years, I always thought, hey, if you were going to make a live action adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, and you wanted to, even if you wanted to shot-for-shot remake something, you want to know what you should shot-for-shot remake? You should shot-for-shot remake the intro of the Cowboy Bebop movie, where Spike goes into that one convenience store, takes out the three robbers, the guy that's robbing the cashier, talking about stew mix. What makes a stew? Everyone says the meat. No, it's the stew mix that makes it a stew. Like, that whole scene. And then at the end of it, you have the guy come out like John Travolta in Pulp Fiction, and then he holds up the woman, and then Spike does his thing where he shoots the woman. Or he doesn't shoot the woman. He shoots the guy, and he saves the woman, but he looks like he's an empathetic asshole while doing it, until you realize, oh, hey, no, he's actually a nice guy. But he did what he did to convince... It's fantastic scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in all of Cowboy Bebop. And then the reason why I thought it would be a perfect way to introduce it is because he has a line where the old woman asks, he called you a cowboy. What did he mean? I'm just a humble bounty hunter, ma'am. That's what I wanted, right? The movie didn't do that, because the movie doesn't use tank, and that's fine for the movie. It goes into the slow of Ask DNA, and that's fine. But I was like, hey, if you're gonna do live action Bebop, there's no reason why that scene couldn't exist anywhere else in the canon of Bebop. There's no reason why that couldn't exist like early Bebop, before they meet Faye and Ed and everything. So using that scene is a wonderful introduction to Cowboy Bebop. It shows you what Spike and Jet, what they do now, what their jobs are, that they're bounty hunters. They go in and they're taking out basically this low-rung guy holding up a convenience store, like a run-of-the-mill convenience store somewhere. That's it. That's all it is. That's what they're going after. They're not going after heavy million Wulong freaking bounties. They're going after the little guys because they can, and it's easy money, and they're broke and they need the money. That was kind of the thing, but they adapted that, but then they changed all of it. So the guy is not there being like, hey, I got screwed over by my security company, and he doesn't have like the similar motivation. He says the words corporations like 5 times, like a weird ass buzzword, because you really want to know that he's pissed off at the corporations, this nebulous thing that he hates, rather than trying to get back. Like, the guy in the anime movie like had understandable motivations. He got laid off by his old security company, so he's gonna go rob places that uses that security company as customers to try and, I'd assume, convince people to stop using that security company because it's quote-unquote worthless, because he knows how to hack it, and he's targeting those places, so then they would be fearful to use that security company moving forward, and it hurts the man, but specifically that one company. Live action Bebop is like, no, we're just gonna fight the corporations. TM, I guess. And all the while he's doing that while holding up a casino. I don't know why you're holding up a casino to hit it against the man and the corporations. They don't explain that link. Like, there could very well be a link there, but they don't really explain it all that well. We don't know why they're in a casino. But then anyway, Spike shows up. He's wearing his headphones because, again, this is a readaptation of that scene, but instead of being a run-of-the-mill convenience store, we're in a high-profile casino in space for reasons. Spike's introduction here is he has a coin that he flips up into the air, and then he does this cool kickflip thing to knock the coin into Buddy's forehead, which, rule of cool, yeah, that is really cool, but it's not smart, because they already have like 3 guns trained on you, and the amount of time it would take to not only flip the coin up, but then to kickflip it into a guy, like, you would have been shot 50 times. Well, not 50 times, because the guns wouldn't fire that fast. But you would have been shot by that point. Which is why, when they did it in the original, it made sense. Because it was only one guy he was after, not 3. Because there were 3 in the live action. One guy, and he was just like, hey, how much for this? And it's a little party popper. But nobody knows what it is. The audience doesn't even know what it is until he pulls the pin. And the confetti flies out, and then it's a distraction. And then he hits the guy and knocks him into the coffee maker. Like, that's smart. That's cool. Here, it's like you're trying to make rule of cool, but then you're suspending our disbelief that no one would shoot him while he's trying to do this. You screw up the Pulp Fiction reference by having Buddy come out there, and he comes out with his gun, and then you give him the time to, scramble with his gun, charge it, and then point it at people, despite the fact that both Spike and Jet are right there with their own guns. Why don't you just shoot the guy? That's the thing. Nobody shoots first. We're talking about cowboys. We're talking about the scoundrels of space. We're talking about anime versions of Han Solo in some ways, and you don't freaking shoot first. Why not? But they did do the thing that I wanted them to do, which is there was an old lady there, and it's just like, hey, who are you? And he's like, just a humble bounty hunter, man. And then we go, and that's fine. But it's like, everything before it was just so badly done. Ruby did this better. Ruby did it better. How is that possible? How could Ruby remake the intro of Knocking on Heaven's Door better than Netflix? My God. Because here's the thing. Ruby's production values are super low. And in season 1 of Ruby, they were super low. Like, visually, from like a character design and a set design standard, it looks like garbage. But the passion is there. And it's like they legitimately cared about what they were riffing on. I don't feel like the Netflix guys do. Or it just feels like at somewhere along the line, you might have one person really passionate. Maybe it's the writer, maybe it's the director, or what have you. But somewhere along the line, there are a lot of other people that are just doing a job. And I feel like it's very obvious. And in this scene specifically, like, the writing is, like, bleh. But, like, even in visual effects, like, if anyone praises the super visual effects, I'm gonna look at you sideways. Specifically because of this scene where Jet shows up, and he pops through the ceiling, and I swear to God, I could see the Corridor crew guys doing better in 24 hours with the effect. It's like, it's not a practical effect at all, and it looks hella fake, and it's just so bad. All right, so that's the intro. I had major problems with that because they adapted things badly. But they do that a lot. These episodes are like 45 minutes long, and the anime episodes were only around 20 minutes after you remove the intro and the outro and any commercials or what have you. So you have twice the length of any episode to, like, quote unquote flesh it out. But they were so tightly made before that you're either adding padding or you do what this show did a lot and you combine them. What they tried to do in several cases is not one-to-one adapt other episodes of Bebop into this. They tried to take 2 episodes of Bebop and combine them into 1 episode of Bebop. So, like, Faye's actual quote-unquote introduction in Netflix Bebop is against the eco-terrorists. So now the eco-terrorists in the anime, they had a 20-minute thing where they were doing their business, and then there was this big fight out against the jump rings and all that stuff. No, none of that ever happens. They change a lot of that to quote-unquote make it work, and why they're trying to make it work is because now this is Faye's new intro. This is showing us who this person actually is, because she showed up briefly in episode 1. And maybe this is another reason why I'm so pissed at that intro scene, because it takes place on the casino where Faye is supposed to show up, but she doesn't show up. You have Faye Valentine in the same episode as a space casino, but you don't have Faye in the scene where you're in the casino. Why? All right, so now we're going to talk about Faye Valentine, I guess, because this is where we're at. A lot of people have a variety of problems with Faye Valentine in Netflix, and I feel like some of my problems are in line with theirs, others are not. A lot of people don't like her character design. They think her outfit is shit. I don't care about her outfit at all. I 100% am aware that Faye Valentine from the anime and her character design is over-sexualized as hell. Some would argue that's kind of the point for a variety of things, and if for quote-unquote modern audiences you didn't want to do that, or more understandably, from what I can get, practical purposes, that's fine. People can point to cosplayers that do the Faye Valentine outfit, and I'm like, yeah, that's fine, but you're gonna be in a studio set with studio lights, and you're gonna have this actress be in this outfit for hours upon hours upon hours. Get her something far more comfortable that at least pays homage to the outfit. That's fine. I don't care. That's not my biggest gripe. My biggest gripe is Faye Valentine in the Netflix ain't Faye Valentine. And I feel like that'll be a springboard to talk about several other characters, because they're not the same characters in this show whatsoever. Who is Faye Valentine? All right? So you can just be very, very basic with Faye Valentine from the anime and say she's a badass woman bounty hunter who takes no shit. But really, that's not, like, that is one part of Faye. How I like to describe Faye Valentine is that she is a desperate person who does things easy. Every single situation that Faye runs into, it's a matter of, can I survive this? Because if I can't survive this, I'm getting the hell out. That's the starting point of Faye. Part 2 is, hey, how can I make money for this? Is it easy money? Is it like quick cash that I can make? Great, because I am then, for number 3, going to take that cash and I'm going to go gamble it. Netflix Faye doesn't gamble. At all. Like, you know, the thing that was her introduction, the thing that she she spends a lot of time in the show doing. She gambles everything. She constantly gambles all the time. There's a bit in the fridge episode of Cowboy Bebop where she gambles with Jet and steals all of his shit. She cheats, but it's still gambling. It's a part of who she is and what she does, and Netflix Faye doesn't gamble. This is the greater problem I have with pretty much all of the characters. The main characters especially, is that they have, like, any flaws that these characters had in the anime are sanded down heavily. They either don't have any flaws at all, or they don't have the same flaws because the flaws that they had are too questionable. Like, you don't want someone to be a heavy gambler, so she's not anymore. She just doesn't gamble. You don't want Jet to have very weird romantic relationships that are unfulfilling, and being, like, kind of a dick to former partners and that. No, you want him to be perfect and just have been screwed over by life. And he has a daughter now, which we'll get to. Spike made a lot of bad decisions and did a lot of really shitty stuff back in the day because he used to work for what is essentially the Yakuza. And they've kind of sanded that down too, and everything bad that he did for good reasons now, or something. They're trying to make these characters a lot more virtuous than they actually are, and I have a problem with that because that's not who they are. That's who they are now in this Netflix adaptation, and if you want to separate the two, fine, then that's a way that you can mentally deal with it, and then just say that they're not the same. But when you're going to call something Bebop, that's when I have problems. So with Faye Valentine, she's not a gambler, and I think that that's a major problem, because that's who she was. That is why, like, when she starts prioritizing other things that aren't making the quick buck, that aren't just how she personally can benefit from things, that is major character growth for her. But we don't get that here. We still get her backstory about trying to find her past because she's lost it. She was frozen and was an amnesiac, and that all is still there. But we removed her medical debt. For some reason, there was an interview with the creator of Cowboy Bebop who said that they didn't want this world to be a dystopian future. You're ruining, like, you're not ruining, you're just changing, and I don't like the change. That's kind of how this goes. It depends on what your goals are. You're ruining it if you're wanting an actual quote-unquote faithful adaptation of the anime. You are 100% ruining it in that context. Because what is Faye Valentine's motivation? She wants money. She wants money, all the money. Why? Because she's running from massive amounts of debt. She either hopes that she can pay off her debt with all of the money she quickly accrues and then is able to gamble into even more money and pay off a medical debt, or she's just going to keep running from a medical debt and then just live a life of luxury with all the money that she steals, swindles, and gambles with. Like, that's Faye Valentine in a nutshell. But Netflix Faye Valentine doesn't gamble. She's still an amnesiac. She was still a frozen corpse, basically, and then got de-thawed and then conned out of her life, basically. That's still true, but she's not running from the massive medical debt anymore, to the point where I don't know why Netflix Faye is a bounty hunter. In the anime, it understands why she eventually turned to that. Because she wasn't a bounty hunter originally. She became a bounty hunter because when traveling with Spike and Jet, that was a very cool and quick, easy way to use some of the skills that she has to earn a quick buck, which is 100% part of her goal set. But here in the Netflix show, we don't see that. We don't see really any reason why we are led to believe that she is a good bounty hunter. Like, I realize that you can make an argument that even in the anime, none of them are good bounty hunters because they don't turn in bounties, like, almost ever, and they barely make any money at all. We're surprised that how they make money at all. That is a thing, and that's a fair point to make. But here in the live action, it's like, why is she there? Any of the bounties that do get turned in, they're not really helped along by her at all. She's just sort of there the vast majority of the time. There's this one scene between her and Spike where she's like, oh, of course I'm a cool bounty hunter. Look at this really cool bounty that I got. Look, it was claimed by Faye Valentine. And then Spike now suddenly respects her for reasons, but I'm like, but you're not showing that. You didn't care in episodes past that you're going and doing flashbacks of moments in the past and shit. You do that a lot with Spike's backstory. Why don't you just show us a flashback of you taking out this guy that is supposedly really bad and cool and badass? Show us, convince us why you should be and why you are a bounty hunter. I don't get why Faye is a bounty hunter in live action Bebop. It doesn't make sense to me. And then, like, you take episodes that were Faye episodes in the anime and then you turn them not Faye episodes because you adapted Brain Scratch, which was, you know, this weird, almost pyramid scheme like cult that she gets involved with going for a bounty. And instead, you just have Spike do it, and then you wrap it into his whole backstory with Vicious and Julia instead, and instead you just have Faye go and sleep with a mechanic who you introduced for the episode. For reasons, like, I don't necessarily care on whatever the hell Faye's sexual orientation is. It just seems really weird to me that you introduce this character purely for this reason. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It feels somewhat forced, where you bring in this character and they just magically hook up. There was no connection. There was no nothing. There was no, like, any spark of a relationship. We just kind of cut to them and they've already slept together. And then I'm like, wait, when did this happen? Why? What? Maybe I missed something, but that just seemed really odd to me, especially because this was an adaptation of a Faye episode and they removed all of that. And they did this thing instead. Other people can have arguments of whether or not Faye would have slept with a woman. I think she probably would have. That's not my issue, because Faye in the anime has attempted to have multiple romantic partners. Oh, okay, here. Now we're going to talk about Gren. Okay, so, Gren. I don't have a problem with Netflix Gren as a character. I know some people who do, who have major problems with Netflix Gren. I don't. My one problem, and my one and only problem with Netflix Gren, is that you call them Gren. Netflix Gren could have been an original character, might as well have been an original character for all of the absolutely zero ties that they have to the anime version. You might as well just change their name and give them a different name. That would have been fine. I would have been perfectly fine with that. But you called them Gren, and here's my problem. Gren from the anime, right? What do we know about Gren from the anime? Gren used to be a mercenary. Did some bad shit on Titan, was a very good fighter, got hooked up with a lot of experimental drugs that kind of screwed them over majorly. And also, Gren plays a mad saxophone. Gren is actually the one who plays Goodnight Julia for the first time in the anime. That's important. But what out of that does Netflix Gren do? None of it. Gren doesn't pick up a saxophone in Netflix anime. That's not Gren's purpose anymore. Gren's purpose is to be the sassy gay friend who goes, "Yes, queen," to everything that Julia does. And to also help out Anna with... Oh god, Anna. So Gren also helps out Anna. And generally speaking, I'm okay with this character and what they did in the story that they wrote. I just wish that they didn't call them Gren, because it's not Gren. Don't call them Gren if it's not Gren. Don't make that connection. Don't give me a reason to be pissed off at your lack of adaptating the original source material. It didn't need to be Gren. It could have been any other character, and we would have been fine with that. You don't need to name your secondary characters after the other secondary characters just to have the name connection, right? That just seems lazy, and why did you do that? Like, were you afraid to adapt Gren properly? Like, in the proper way? Did you not want to have a character that got hormonally messed up and is screwed around with that? Did you not want to, like, risk backlash for trying to adapt that type of character? That's fine if you were worried about that. You know, that's perfectly fine and understandable. But then just don't adapt Gren. There's so much else from the anime you didn't bother adapting. You didn't adapt the kid who's lived for 80 years. He doesn't exist at all in this adaptation. You didn't adapt Ed until the very end. God, why do I keep bringing up things and saying we'll get to that? Because holy shit. You didn't adapt so much, you didn't need to adapt Gren. Okay, so that's Gren. That's my beef on Gren. Anna, I guess, is okay. Like, Anna from the anime, she had her shop, which was a convenience store, also somewhat bar, maybe. Now she runs this highfalutin club that the Syndicate goes to all the time. Okay, I guess. It serves purpose. I guess. It vastly changes the type of interactions that we've had with her. But, alright, fine. Because you've changed what you want to do with Vicious and Julia, who we'll get to. But first, I wanted to get to Jet. So, Jet, you made two major changes. You changed why he left from the Force. Because Jet in the anime, he stopped being a cop because he is the quote-unquote good cop, and all of the other cops in his precinct were corrupt as hell. So, he didn't want to deal with that anymore, and he either left or got pushed out or that sort of thing. Now, that's not his backstory at all anymore. Instead, he got framed as to being the actual corrupt cop by the one and only actual corrupt cop. Not the whole precinct, no, because cops are good. actually, except for that one time that they stole their bounty and acted like dicks constantly throughout everything else. There was a tonal difference there that I didn't fully understand. They're both assholes to our main characters, but also the good guys TM because they're not corrupt. I don't get that. Jet gets forced out and he gets framed for being a corrupt cop when he's not the corrupt cop. And instead he goes and he deals with the one and only corrupt cop who used to be his former partner. They just changed all of that. And instead of having that other story where Jet goes and meets up with a former flame, hoping and kind of going and acting like nothing's changed, when instead lots of things have changed because it's been a number of years. And there's like a lot of really cool moments in that. No, instead, we're going to give him a kid. And I don't have a problem with the kid giving necessarily. I have a problem with how you did it. Why do I have a problem with how you did it? Because it's Ant-Man. No, I am 100% serious. Paul Rudd's Ant-Man and his relationship with his daughter in that movie is carbon copied into Cowboy Bebop for Jet and his kid. Like, no joke. Jet's first actual meeting with his daughter on camera is to give her a present for her birthday, which is exactly what happens in Ant-Man. And then the exact same scene happens. You have the mom that gets pissed off at him for the gift that was given. You have the new dad who was part of their former life and a cop and this other shit. And the recital and then the ending where they kidnap the kid. And it's Ant-Man. I don't know why you did that. If I wanted to watch Ant-Man, I would have just watched Ant-Man. I'm here to watch Cowboy Bebop. Why am I watching Ant-Man? Like everything else, Jet's actual personality and how he acts and reacts to things, I actually feel like Netflix Jet is probably the closest out of the three main characters to the OG, but his backstory is completely whacked and they added all this other stuff and I don't know why that they did that. They just felt that it was necessary, I guess. Or they wanted people not to know what was going to happen. Because there was a quote from one of the creators who said that, yeah, it would be really boring for fans of Cowboy Bebop if they watched this new show and knew how it was going to end. So we changed things so they wouldn't know how it was going to end. That worked very well for the Game of Thrones writers who were just like, hey, everybody predicted how this is going to end, so we're going to change it, except we're going to do it worse and have it make no sense. So that's Jet. We're moving on. So now we can get into Spike, Vicious, and Julia. Spike, in general, I don't have that much problems with, except for the fact that, you know, he doesn't have a tragic backstory anymore. He doesn't have his tragic TM backstory. I'm gonna steal this description from a friend of mine because I feel like it's very, very apt. In the anime, Spike is only, 26, 28 years old, but he acts and he gives off this feeling of being very world-weary because he feels like he's been around a lot longer than he actually is. He's seen some shit. He's been part of a lot of shit. And it's affected him despite the fact that he's still very young. Netflix Bebop, that doesn't work. Why? Because John Chosen is like in his 50s. Problem with the lack of youthfulness in the actor here is that he's not world weary anymore. He's just weary. And it's different. It's a very different vibe and feel. It doesn't help that, like, when they do most of their choreography, it's very slow. I guess it does very much not help us feel like he's a lot younger than he is. And so you kind of understand when all of this shit happens because you're like, oh yeah, it's not remarkable anymore that all of this shit happened to this guy that's still in his, like, mid to late 20s. No, because he doesn't feel like he's in his mid to late 20s. And then you get to, like, Vicious and Julia. Now, Vicious, I don't know if the creators were patting themselves on the back being like, hey, Vicious didn't have a character, so we gave him one. Vicious's lack of character was like one of the best parts about him. Vicious was a shadow in the original Bebop, right? He shows up 3 times, I think. He shows up in Ballad of Fallen Angels in episode 5. I'm pretty sure he makes a couple of appearances in Jupiter Jazz. Flashbacks don't count. And then he shows up at the very end. And beyond that, he's a ghost, right? You know that he's bad news. The couple of times he does show up, he is a 100% edgelord badass, because that's what he does. He just murders everyone. He's a psychopath, basically. And that's Vicious from the anime. He is a ghostly shadow, and you can 100% believe that he's an assassin for a Yakuza syndicate organization. That type of thing, because that's who he is. Netflix Vicious is not that. Netflix Vicious, I don't know why Netflix Vicious is called Vicious, right? Because he's not. He's a dick, right? He is a dick, but he's like a whining, sniveling dick. We've changed his character, so now his father is one of the high-ranking members of the syndicate. And so the only reason why he is as high-ranking as he is because he's a daddy's boy and because he's getting a lot of perks for being related to one of the head of the syndicate. They do a whole flashback episode with him and Spike that, generally speaking, was an okay episode because it was the only time I actually felt like I wasn't watching Cowboy Bebop, and I was able to actually like separate the two, and I enjoyed that a lot more. But aside from that, all of the good things that Vicious did for the organization was actually Spike, and Vicious just took all the credit for it, I guess. Going to the point where Spike goes off and does an Old Boy ripoff, and then as far as the syndicate is concerned, Vicious was there helping him do it, when no, that's not what happened at all. He was drunk off his ass back at his apartment. Netflix Vicious is like a bad Sephiroth cosplayer at a con, and you know that because there comes this point with Sephiroth cosplayers at a con where by the last day of the con, their hair gel is all messed up and it just kind of flops down and it doesn't hold its place and it looks terrible. And maybe at that point, this one cosplayer decided, you know what, Sephiroth's not going to work. I'm just going to be Draco Malfoy. And that's Vicious. Most of his interactions with other characters are not, they don't fear him because he's a murdering psychopath that's probably going to kill them. Like, he will probably kill some of them, and he does, sort of, but they fear him more because they fear the syndicate. And he very much walks around with a, well, my father's gonna hear about this kind of energy. He himself does not appear threatening. It's just like his position of power that's more threatening than anything, and it's power unearned. And that's kind of the problem I have with his character. There's one particular headcanon for anime Vicious that I also really like and apply that can't in any way apply to Netflix Vicious, which is probably another reason why I don't like it. And I mentioned that Vicious is a shadow, and that's because there is one particular headcanon where he is. Because at the end of Ballad of Fallen Angels, Vicious is at the top of a church, and after they throw Spike out the window and go, na, 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 and do the whole Greenbird thing, there are grenades that explode, and you see them explode, and that makes you assume that Vicious is dead. Now, he's not dead. He comes out of that unscathed, but headcanon is that no, he either was dead long before that, or that's where he died, and Vicious from that point on is just a shadow in Spike's memory constantly haunting him because his past is coming up to catch up with him because he left it in the fridge. Throwback to my last episode talking about Bebop. But that doesn't exist here because they've given him a character, and it's not a very good character, and they spend literally half the show, because they keep coming back to it on like every episode or every other episode. They instead do this thing where he tries to take over the syndicate, and I legitimately feel like this plot was stolen from a movie that I watched at one point in time, but I can't tell you what it was. I very specifically remember a scene where you have a character talking with two other mob members, and they're talking about this plan to go kill the head of the mob, and it plays out the exact same way. And so everything just goes along, and then he ends up killing everybody, I guess, but then Julia... So as bad as I hate Vicious, I hate Julia even more. And that's kind of where my problem lies with it, especially because I read an article where the creators said that, hey, the female characters from the old Bebop are antiquated, and we need to make them better. Because of that, I look at Julia specifically, and I'm like, you made her worse. Julia in the anime was a member of the Syndicate. She was probably an assassin just like Spike and Vicious, and that's why she knew how to use guns really well, and she knew how to drive like a boss. And she went into hiding just like Spike did because she left the Syndicate, and the Syndicate doesn't like that you left the Syndicate. So that's why she went off and did that. But instead, you made her a jazz singer, arm candy for Vicious, and you made them married, which is like, I'm okay with them getting married because that may have happened. I could have seen that written in the original as part of it, because they were in a relationship, and then Spike ended up coming in, and then they ended up having an affair sort of thing. That was their whole bit. That's fine. Then you're like, no, Julia is going to betray Vicious, is going to not go back with Spike because apparently she doesn't like Spike anymore because he didn't save her or something, and then she's gonna shoot Spike and toss him out the window so they can do Greenbird. And now she's gonna become like the leader of the Syndicate? But why? What are her ambitions? Why does she think that she'll be able to do that? I realize that the Syndicate in the Netflix show is constantly shown as incompetent, I guess is the best way of describing it. So maybe you think that you can take that over fairly easily, and that might be what she thinks she can do. This version of Julia doesn't have the skill set, doesn't have the charisma to be able to do that. She was a whining, terrified mess until like the final bits of the episode. Like, I don't understand how you think that this sudden heel turn is a good idea. Like, maybe some weird season 2 will make this work, but I really doubt it. And I feel like with both her and Vicious, this is the problem. Vicious was a shadow, Julia was a ghost. And I feel like the reason why they worked in the original Bebop is because that's all they were. When Julia was mentioned in Cowboy Bebop, in the OG, she was mentioned as if she was a ghost, that she didn't exist anymore. We assumed she was dead for a lot of the show. But Netflix Bebop doesn't do that. They show her in episode 1. They show that she's alive. They show that she's around. She's not a ghost. She is a person. She has a story now. And the reason why they did that is because, as I mentioned, they can't do subtlety in this new version of Bebop. That doesn't exist. So you can't have a scene where Spike gets really super serious and quiet and introspective when talking about love, because you need to know he's talking about Julia. So we're gonna do Vietnam flashbacks to let you know that he's thinking of Julia. Subtlety is dead in this show, and that's such a big problem. And I think almost the worst part of all is that there is no chemistry between Julia and Spike. There's not supposed to be chemistry between Julia and Vicious, right? He's an abusive partner, and she's just trying to survive through that. That's fine. They're not supposed to have chemistry. I can go with that. But like in the Brain Scratch ripoff, and then at the end where they actually meet again, there's no chemistry. They don't click. They're in a relationship because we're told they're in a relationship. She ends up dating and spending time with them because the story demands it, not because it feels like it's right. I don't know if that's the actress's fault. It's far more likely the writing, because the writing's just not good. Like, I feel like at one point in time, people are going to talk about this romance in the same way they talk about freaking Anakin and Padme from Attack of the Clones, because it just doesn't work. They don't feel like they belong together. They don't feel like they were ever in love. We only believe that they're in love because we're told that that's what happened. We're slightly shown that they slept together and that they were lovers for reasons, but like, we don't get it. We don't understand. And in the anime, they never showed us that either, but they didn't need to. Julia was on screen with Spike so little, and they used that for a very different purpose that you didn't need to necessarily show us them clicking. They still clicked anyway because Julia had been shown to be a badass, to be like, she was the woman you would think of, because you spent this entire show wondering what type of woman would be with Spike Spiegel. And then when Julia shows up, you're like, oh, her. Makes sense. Like, they riff on that in the movie because he's like, oh, I love a woman that can kick my ass. Julia's a character that can kick Spike's ass. I 100% believe that. But I don't believe that with the Netflix adaptation. I don't believe that Julia could actually legitimately defeat Spike in any semblance of combat or fighting. The only reason she had any semblance of an upper hand on him at all, the only reason she shot him is because he was struck in disbelief. That was it. If they meet in the future, like, he should be able to kill her. He probably won't because she's Julia, but he should 100% be able to overpower her and kill her and remove all that. But he won't, because they'll be like, oh, but we were lovers once, and I remember back to a better time, but they still don't click. It's not an earned relationship. It doesn't feel earned, and it just adds on to my problems with Julia. Netflix Bebop feels like I am watching a high school essay version of someone who watched the show and needed to write a book report. It has a lot of the key points there so that you can say it was Bebop. It has enough there so that you can use the branding, so that you can use the name of the characters, but everything else has changed. All of their backstories, even the backstories of villains and antagonists, they're all changed. The backstories of the main characters, they're all changed. Hell, Jet doesn't even have the hammerhead. Why doesn't Jet have the hammerhead? They give him an ATV instead. Like, Spike has the swordfish, thankfully. Faye eventually gets the red tail, but Jet doesn't have the hammerhead. Why doesn't Jet have the hammerhead? Because they don't put him in a situation where he would ever need it, and it's an additional expense probably for CG that they don't want to pay for. That's the cynic in me talking. And so we'll wrap up this thing by talking about Ed, because everyone wants to talk about Ed, because that was the last thing that they remember, because they put Ed at the very end. So here's my thoughts on Ed. You can't adapt Ed. For many, many years now, I have believed that it is impossible to adapt Ed. Out of all of the characters, Ed is the most the most cartoonish, I think is the best way to describe Ed, because Ed can only exist in animation in the way that we know Ed. The only way that you can have the wiggly Ed, the over enthusiastic Ed, the crazy eccentric Ed is in animation. So I never believed that, it doesn't matter who you cast as Ed, I do not believe that they could do it right. Now, saying that, I'm conflicted when it comes to the Ed scene, and I'm wondering if it's because I just absolutely hate how the scene was directed. Our first shot of Ed is camera in face with Ed screaming Spike's name, and it's like, that is a terrible introduction for Ed. But you take all of the worst parts that you could possibly adapt about Ed, which is like the character design and all of that, and you put it front and center. Why do you do that? There are parts of this scene, like when the camera is backed out and Ed's just going off and trying to be Ed, that, you know, I could believe it. I could believe that this actor could be Ed. I 100% believe that they could possibly pull that off. They can't do the over-the-top accentuous, like wiggly noodle arm Ed or anything like that, sure. But everything else I feel like they could have done, but they didn't focus on that. They focused on everything that they couldn't do. They focused on the character design, on the bad gelled red hair, on the weird glasses, net goggle things. Why? And of course they tossed it here at the end because they didn't want it to be, I don't know why they tossed it in at the end, because they didn't want to give Ed any introduction properly or anything like that. Like, you didn't need to do that scene. You already mentioned Ed earlier on in Casual because Ed was sending them bounties and information and shit. You didn't need to do this, but they did it. There was one way that I had in my mind that you can adapt Ed, and I don't think everybody would agree with me that this is how you would adapt Ed. Some people would be disappointed with this idea I had, but the idea I had with Edward is like the way that you adapt Edward for live action is that you don't. Not that you don't have the character. You 100% have the character, but you just don't do it in the same way. You don't have Ed occupy the same physical space. Because Radical Edward is a hacker. How can you bypass this? You have them be entirely 100% digital. You have them interact with the Bebop crew through all of their tech, through their communicators, through showing up on view screens and things like that. And then you could just go and pay Bones to animate it. And everyone would freaking love that. But then if you needed to have Ed actually show up in person, you say that no, Ed is not an AI who is communicating with them or anything. No, Ed is a real person. Ed is a person in a vat, like freaking Mr. House from Fallout New Vegas. And you could have the characters who go after Ed because Ed has a bounty on them, and you can have them find Ed in a vat. And you open up the vat, and look who it is. It's freaking Ed's voice actress from the Japanese dub. And then you just close the lid again, and then you do some shit like that. And then that way, not only in the Japanese dub could you continue to have Ed be actual Ed, but then you could hire the English voice actor for Ed from the English dub and then just have them be Ed. And that's a way that you would never piss anybody off because it would legitimately be Ed. I think that that would be one way that you could do it. I don't know if anyone would enjoy that because it wouldn't actually have Ed in the physical space and it wouldn't have noodly armed Ed or any of the things that we would hope that they do, but we all know that they can't. But that is one way of dealing with Ed. I don't like the Ed scene, but I am conflicted in wondering if that's because I don't like how they are adapting the character or because they just have terrible cinematography. I feel like it's probably going to end up being a matter of both because they've shown with all of the other characters that they don't know how to do them properly without massively changing their backstories. So they're going to massively change Ed's backstory too and not make Ed Ed. And that'll be depressing when it eventually happens, if it happens. The show hasn't been greenlit for a season 2, even though they set it up for one. It's been stuck on their top 10 list for a while, so apparently it's getting viewed. It all depends on whether or not Netflix decides that that's good enough to invest in a second season. I don't know if it will. Part of me hopes that this is it and they're not going to touch it again, and I'm just going to go and rewatch the actual Bebop now because I want to palate cleanse that. I want to remind myself how Bebop was in my mind. And maybe that's why I don't like it. I started this video by saying that the people who are probably going to like this Netflix Bebop are the people that never ever watched the original that don't have the comparison, right? Because the comparison is 100% what will kill this for the vast majority of people. They say that they wrote it and they designed it in a way where they didn't want it to be compared to the original and they wanted it to be new and original, but then they had so many comparisons that it's impossible not to make the comparison. So I don't know why you would do that. If you wanted to avoid comparisons with the anime, you try and distance yourself as much as possible from it. Keep the characters the same, but make the stories entirely different. But you didn't do that. Instead, you made absolutely new characters and you gave them the same name as anime characters because you wanted that connection there. You wanted people to make that connection, to remind them, yeah, you're watching Bebop, only to then make them feel that, no, I'm not watching Bebop. This isn't Bebop, because it doesn't feel like Bebop, and that's the problem. The entire show doesn't feel like Bebop, and not even Yoko Kanno could fix that. And I love Yoko Kanno. I love her work, and we'll end this video by talking about what I don't like about Yoko Kanno's work here. I don't have a problem with any of the tracks she made. I 100% believe that I will be listening to the soundtrack of this show on Spotify on its own. It really felt like the producers of the show grabbed Kanno because they knew that they couldn't make they knew they couldn't sell Cowboy Bebop without having Yoko Kanno as the composer. And they did the bare minimum in getting that to happen. There is nothing on this soundtrack that has the special moments that the soundtrack of the original Bebop has. It is a lot of jazz, and I have no problem with the jazz that was written. Kanno does good jazz, but a lot of my favorite songs from the original series weren't the jazzy ones. Like, some of them were, but then, like, it has things like Greenbird, it has things like Rain, which they just copied wholesale. They didn't have her write any new tracks like that. There's no track like ELM at all. There's no track like Ask DNA because they copied it. ELM's one of my favorite tracks from Bebop. It's not there. All that's here is just more jazz. If there's not a trumpet or a saxophone in it, it's not new music. Even then, it just feels like they went to Kanno and they were like, just write a whole bunch of jazz and give it to us, and we'll put it in the show. It doesn't feel like it was purposely put in places in such a way that made you feel like it was designed to be there. They did that with the music that they stole from the anime, and they just kind of slapped it in there. Like, when Rain shows up, it doesn't have the same impact. When Greenbird shows up, it literally is only there for the reference. That's it. And everything else is just, hey, just have some background jazz because that's what's supposed to be here. And that's what it felt like. And that was depressing. I said when I heard that Netflix was doing this that I didn't mind it because we were going to get more jazz from Yoko Kanno. And that's exactly what I got. But I really hoped that there was going to be a little bit more than that we were going to have a worthy soundtrack of the name Cowboy Bebop. And while I still love it and I'm going to listen to it, and I absolutely love that we got more Kanno music, it wasn't that. And that's this show in a nutshell. I hoped for more Bebop, and I got a show that really wished it was Bebop. But at the end of the day, it wasn't. It was just a show in space with guns and snark. And that's the end of that.